Thank you. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Moberg. I'm a forensic scientist with the Arizona Department of Public Safety in the Firearms and Toolmark Unit.
How long have you worked there?
I've been with DPS since February of 2013. I've been assigned to the Firearms Unit since October 1st of 2018.
Can you tell us about your education and training to work in the area of firearms identification?
Sure. Part of the hiring standards for the DPS Crime Lab is I do have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Arizona State University. My specialized firearms training is I attended the National Firearms Examiner Academy hosted by the ATF in Laurel, Maryland. The academy consists of 4 phases. It's approximately a year long, with phase 1 being research and history of and all of the techniques that go into it. Phase 2 is a full on-site 17-week training experience in Maryland, practicing exactly what it is that we do. Then we go into practical examinations, meaning I'm doing competency tests and proficiency tests throughout the summer and preparing a research project, which in phase 4 I will present and conduct mock trials.
Do you have ongoing training as well?
We do. Every year we're offered the opportunity to attend SHOT Show, which is the firearms industry trade show in Las Vegas every year. There's also the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners meeting once a year, which is our annual training. It is nothing but peers within my discipline doing seminars and presenting on findings for various cases and various new technologies coming out.
And in DPS itself, is there any type of QAS or means to ensure that all of the firearms examiners are continuing to perform appropriately?
Absolutely. After the training, we are all given a competency test. We have to demonstrate our ability to do the job. So it's a very complex test consisting of all of the disciplines that we do, tool marks, firearms, serial number restoration, various other aspects of my job. But then every year we're giving a proficiency test from an outside source, so we're testing our continued or demonstrating our continued competency within the field.
So I want to start by asking you just some generic questions about how a semi-automatic handgun works.
So a semi-automatic gun, meaning a semi-automatic means that it is designed to fire one round with a single pull of the trigger, but it's also meant to cycle the firearm. And what I mean by cycle is the process of loading a firearm means introducing a magazine, particularly in a semi-automatic, which contains a number of cartridges. Cycling it means pulling the slide back and allowing it to go forward. When that happens, it strips off one of the cartridges from the magazine and loads it into chamber. So we call that chambering. At that point, it is ready to fire. When the trigger is pulled, the firing pin is released on a striker type system. It's a spring-loaded firing pin, or a hammer type system where it's a weighted hammer that goes in and strikes a firing pin to hit this back of this cartridge to ignite the round. It then begins, the pressure builds up within that cartridge, expels the bullet down the barrel, but that same amount of pressure is also working to push it back. So it pushes that slide rearward, so it starts to move it back, unlocks the barrel, lets it go all the way back, and then it comes forward and loads the next one.
So I'm going to put up, first, I have Exhibit 76 here. Is this a semi-automatic handgun?
Yes, it is.
And then I'm going to put 85 in here. Is that what a live round looks like?
A live round, or we call it a cartridge, it's just a single unit of ammunition, consists of the cartridge case, primer, powder, and projectile.
So when a handgun is used and the trigger is pulled, we have a projectile that goes out to the barrel of the gun. What happens to the rest of that cartridge or live round?
So the rectangular portion on top, the black portion of the slide that's on top, that whole thing moves. So it will actually, when the cartridge is fired, the pressure of that cartridge will force that rearward, and it opens up that chamber so that the expelled cartridge can be ejected, the cartridge case will be ejected, and the new one can be loaded in via the magazine. The very bottom here where the kind of the hand is grabbing at the bottom is where the magazine is inserted.
So, put exhibit 77. Is this where you're talking about where the cartridge is going to eject from?
That is actually showing the side of the barrel that which houses the chamber, but that section opens up and that is where the ejection takes place.
So you had talked about this in some of the different jobs that you do as a firearms analyst. When a person fires a semi-automatic handgun, are there any sort of identifying tool marks that might be left on the projectile or the bullet?
Absolutely. All of that pressure that builds up and is pushing the cartridge case back, it is resting against what we call the breech face. The breech face has a hole in it where the firing pin comes through and it strikes the primer. The primer is just that little button in the center of the cartridge. It's actually a very volatile compound that ignites the powder charge instantly. So all of that pressure builds up and presses against that breech face. This being a semi-automatic, as it cycles back, the barrel has to unlock. So it moves slightly back, but then as it unlocks, it drops down. And as it drops down, that cartridge case is scratching up against the surface of that breech face, imparting all kinds of marks that we use for comparison purposes.
When the projectile itself is fired out the barrel, are there any tool marks left on that?
Yes. So when the bullet is being pushed out of the barrel, through the barrel, all of that pressure is pushing it through. A barrel is rifled. Now, rifling is a pattern of lands and grooves that are in a rotational pattern that impart the spin on there. All of that pressure causes the back end of that projectile to expand and to fill that void. So as it's going through, it's dragging along the inside of the barrel, picking up any of the imperfections from the manufacturing process that are there, similar to a fingerprint. So when it comes out, we're able to look around there and you can see the pattern of the rifling all the way around the bullet and the individual striations or scratches on the surface coming from the inside of the barrel.
So if you are provided with a gun, casings, and projectiles, are you able to determine in any way if those casings or projectiles were fired from a specific gun?
Yes, and we do that by doing what we call a comparison. So we go ahead and we take that fired evidence and we're going to look at it. We want to verify that there's markings on there that we can use for comparisons. Then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to test fire this firearm. I'm going to collect those test fired cartridge cases and projectiles if need be, and I'm going to do a comparison side by side on my comparison microscope. It's just a high powered microscope that allows me to see two things simultaneously side by side at the same magnification. So I'm going to have them side by side and try to line up those scratches and marks that are left on there from the machining process to the next.
So when we're talking about a barrel, you said there's like lands and grooves in there. Is that alone enough for you to identify if a projectile was fired from a specific gun, or are you looking for more specific, unique characteristics from each gun?
So each one, we start with what we call class characteristics. The class characteristics are those that are pre-designed before manufacture, such as what caliber is it? Is it a 9mm? Is it a 45, 40, whatever it may be? Then we're going to look at how many lands and grooves are there. If there is, maybe there's 5, maybe there's 6, maybe there's 8. All of that we use as an initial screening. Can this come from this gun? Say I have a gun that's a 9mm and I have a 45 bullet. That's not possible. So it's an automatic rule out. But those imperfections from the manufacturing process are what we use, and how the scratches translate into there are very unique to those barrels.
So you said you test fire the weapon. Why do you do that? What are you using that for?
Well, when a case like that comes in, whenever we receive a weapon, we first and foremost, we want to verify, number one, that it's safe and unloaded. Number two, that it's actually operational as a weapon. So we're verifying that it can fire and it works as designed. But then I'm also using that time, I document the condition of it as I received it. I document any of the features that are on there, such as in this particular case up here, we have a brown and black gun. That's one of the notes that I would have on there.
When you are doing this comparison and looking for these unique characteristics that you may see from the tools or the actual combustion of this, are there different levels of interpretation or conclusions that you're able to reach during this comparison process?
Yes, when we're doing a comparison, we're first and foremost looking for marks that recreate. So the different levels of opinion that I can form at the end is I can identify. I can say this piece of fired evidence was fired from this gun. I could say this piece of evidence was not fired from this piece of gun, or this particular gun, excuse me. Or if there's just none of those marks that are reproducing or an insufficient amount of marks for us to actually compare, we can actually go out inconclusive, meaning I'm not sure whether it was or not.
So I'm going to have my paralegal go up to you with a few items here. It is exhibits 235, 38, 40, 239, and 246. I'm going to let you sort of keep those, and I'm going to start with 246, the handgun.
Okay.
Were you provided with that gun as part of a request to determine if you could, well, were you provided with that gun?
I was. When we receive evidence such as a firearm, we actually initial, date, and put the identifying information to the case on the firearm. Right here, just underneath the slide on the frame of this firearm is the DR number, our department record number, the item number. So the combination of that DR number and the item number is our unique identifier to track that piece of evidence. And then my initials and date.
Okay. Were you provided with a couple of casings, 238 and 240?
Yes, I was. And again, when I received these, when we receive evidence such as this fired casing here, which is 240, we initial and date the day we receive it. So it's here. There's my initials and date from when I resealed it. It's currently hiding up. It's actually right up here at the top where I initial and dated it when I received it.
Okay. And were you also provided with a projectile, if you can look at 235 and 239? And I believe you only had one of those.
That's correct. There's the one bullet I received right underneath our unique tracking. We barcode everything. It's got our department record number, item number. I initial and dated it as I received it.
And which number was that?
This is item 239.
Thank you. What were you asked to do with these items?
This particular case, I was asked to compare the cartridge cases and the bullet back to the firearm.
And that's the firearm that we see here in Exhibit 77, what we see as 246.
Yes, it is.
All right. So starting with this, what can you tell us about the gun itself? What is the caliber? What is the brand of that?
The firearm is a Springfield Armory XDM 45 caliber semi-automatic pistol.
And so when we talk about 45 caliber, what does that mean?
45 refers to just the size of the bore. In this particular case, it's a 45 auto caliber, so or 45 ACP, common to most 45s made today. But that's actually the measurement of the bore.
Were you able to, when you looked at you told us you often look to see just initially, do these all match together? When you looked at the caliber of those casings that you were given, did they match with the 45 caliber?
The two cartridge cases I received were Fiocchi brand 45 auto caliber cartridge casings.
Okay. Now, what about the projectile, the bullet that you're given? Is there a way for you to determine if that is consistent with a 45 caliber, being fired from a 45 caliber handgun?
Yes, so when we receive a bullet like this, I'm going to go ahead and measure the diameter across the fired bullet to achieve that, and it measured, I don't know the exact number, but it's approximately 0.45 inches.
Okay. Now, when you first were handed the gun, you said you'd make some notes about that. Did you note anything about it as to whether or not the gun appeared to have been previously fired at some point?
The only notes that we take is we do look down the barrel of the gun. When what I'm looking for is mainly safety purposes. I want to make sure there's no obstruction, because if I fire it and there's an obstruction, could be catastrophic failure of the firearm. But I'm also looking at and documenting the rifling. And when we look down a barrel, we can see, I would notate that it's slightly fouled barrel or whatnot, meaning that there's powder particles and or traces of bullets going through the firearm.
So that would mean it was consistent with having been fired at least.
Correct.
So you talked about test firing. Did you test fire this gun?
I did. I test fired this particular firearm into a water tank. I used the water tank because we wanted to collect projectiles for comparison purposes, and the water tank allows us to do that without damaging the bullets.
What kind of ammunition do you use? How do you determine that?
So first and foremost, we would like to use like ammunition. So this was Fiocchi brand ammunition. We hopefully would have some of that in our reference collection. However, I did not, so I would grab the next closest type of ammunition. I believe it was Winchester that I used in this particular case, that has the same exact type of primer, the same exact type of casing, and the same exact type of projectile.
When you talk about the same exact type, are you talking about like the metals, or what are you talking about?
For instance, the bullet in this case is a copper jacketed round nose full metal jacket. So I would look to test fire a copper jacketed full round nose bullet.
Okay. So when you test fired this gun, did you know anything with regards to the functionality of it?
I noted that it functioned as designed. I did test fire this by hand chambering. I didn't try a magazine in there because one wasn't submitted with it, but it operated with no problems.
Okay. How many times did you test fire it?
We collect a minimum of 3. In this particular case, I only did fire it 3 times. That's all that I needed.
And so each time you're having to put a bullet in there and pull the trigger each time?
That's correct.
If you'd had a magazine, would you still have had to pull the trigger each time to fire it?
Yes, it operates still semi-automatic, so the trigger would have to be pulled each time to fire a cartridge case. I just wouldn't have to reload one into the chamber each time.
So once you created these test fire, let's start with cartridges, did you attempt to compare those to the ones you were provided, exhibits 238 and 240?
So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to collect my test fires, and I'm going to compare them to each other. And why I'm doing that is I want to make sure that there's marks on there that reproduce over our test fires. If there's no marks reproducing, how would I be able to compare it to the evidence? From there, once I determine that it's a sufficient, and I do photo document all of my comparisons, once I figure it's sufficient for an identification there, I'll go ahead and do a comparison to the unknown evidence and make my opinion based on that comparison.
So the test fires that you have, you look to make sure that those are creating each time the same, both class characteristics and individual characteristics.
Correct, yes.
And the class being sort of the generic ones that every type of Springfield might create.
Correct, yes.
And these individual ones are characteristics that are specific and unique to this weapon.
Correct. They're from use, abuse, cleaning, anything like that, and the individual manufacturing of each component.
When you compared those 2 cartridge casings, 238 and 240, to the test fires that you created from Exhibit 246, the handgun, were you able to reach any conclusion? Also, this Springfield semi-automatic 45 caliber handgun.
That's correct.
This Springfield semi-automatic 45 caliber handgun.
That's correct.
Did that end your work in this case?
That ended my analysis from this case. From then, I go ahead and I take all of my notes. The entire process I'm photo documenting. So when I opened this up and I was documenting the condition as it's receiving, I'm also taking photos. When I'm doing the comparison, I'm also taking photos of the evidence side by side and any kind of areas of interest that I'm looking at. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and document my opinion and my results on our worksheets. I'm also going to print out all of my photos. I am then going to take all of that evidence, I'm going to hand it to another trained examiner. That other trained examiner, without looking at my results, is going to take all of that evidence and do a comparison himself. And then he'll form his own opinion and then verify that it matches or is similar to my results.
And was that done here?
Yes, it was.
Did that alter in any way your opinion?
Not at all. He was in agreement of my results.
When you talk about the photos, so in your report, you're actually showing all of those characteristics that we've talked about so anyone else could later look at them and see how you reached your conclusion.
The photo documentation it's just a snapshot of one portion of the comparison, but yes, a trained examiner should be able to look at them and understand what exactly I was looking at.
Right, so ultimately your conclusion was both those cartridge casings and that projectile that you were provided was fired from the gun you were provided.
That's correct.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Cross-examination.
I just have a couple questions, Your Honor. Mr. Moberg, when did you receive the request to test this firearm?
It was early March of this year.
So March 2025?
Yes.
Okay. And then how long after you received the request did you test the firearm?
I was notified that the request was coming in a couple of days. I received the evidence on a Wednesday, which my week wraps up on Thursday, and I did all of the work on that the following Monday, and the report was put out by Tuesday morning.
Okay, do you know what the date that Tuesday report was put out by?
I don't know the exact date. If you'd like, I can refer to my notes and give you that exact date.
Sure, that'd be great.
Is that okay?
Is that okay?
So the report was authored on March 4th of 2025. The evidence was received in our property and evidence unit on 2/26 of 25, in which I also received them on that 2/26 of 25 and returned them to our evidence room on the 4th of March.
Okay, thank you. And who requested you to do this test on this firearm? Where did your request come from?
This particular request was made from a detective who reached out to me via email explaining could I assist him with a rush. I passed it through my supervisor who allowed me to contact the detective and have the evidence submitted. And then it was assigned to me because the request was sent directly to me.
Do you know what detective that was?
Detective Duncan.
Okay. And then who did you send your report to?
Once I'm finished with my analysis, my report is then reviewed by another examiner and then a supervisor to make sure that it's all technically correct, and then admin, and then they're electronically released to Detective Duncan.
Okay. And then you said you had done some photo documenting. Were those photos attached to this report?
They were attached to all of my case notes, yes.
Okay. So there's a report, case notes, and then the photo documentaries?
It's all part of, the notes and the photo documentation is all one.
And how long do you think that report was total?
Oh, it's roughly 13 pages total, 13, 14 pages with the actual report.
Okay. Thank you. So you fired the firearm 3 times, is that correct?
That's correct.
In your testing?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. And then if you were, did you point it all in the same direction when you fired?
When I did my test firing, I was firing into a water tank. The water tank has it's approximately 10-inch thick stainless steel tube with a rest inside of it that I fire it into. So it stays in one place and fires at a specific angle into the water so that I'm not striking anything or being unsafe in any way.
And what's your distance at that point?
Oh, approximately a foot.
Oh, just a foot away into
Yeah,
the water tank?
Into the water, yeah.
Okay. And then did all of the casings go into the exact same place, like close to the same place?
So around the inlet tube for that we shoot into, we have a big net that catches the cartridge cases.
So you can't really tell where they land then, I guess, because the net catches them? Is that what you're saying?
It's land as far as they kind of shoot out of the gun and then get caught by the net.
Okay, so they don't land on the ground and roll to the, close to each other? Okay. But you kind of got a feel for this gun because you shot it, right?
I did.
So if you were to shoot the gun straight and then move 40 degrees to the right and shoot it again, do you think that the casings would end up in the same area?
Objection as to speculation without foundation of,
He shot the gun, Your Honor. I was
Well,
asking his
hold on,
opinion.
Hold on. He can answer, if, first of all, if he understands the question.
If I may clarify.
Sure.
So you're asking if I point a weapon, say this way, and then turn this way.
Correct.
Okay. I can't answer that.
Go ahead.
I would expect the cartridge case to be slightly different from the very first one, but not much, depending on what interacts with it in its flight path. Did it bounce off of something? What's the floor type? What is, or whatever it hits first? I couldn't say without knowing any of that.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that the casings would end up in the same place if you didn't move and you fired 2 shots? They should end up close to the same location.
Again, it really depends on what is around, because typically when a semi-automatic firearm is fired, the slide comes back and the cartridge case ejects up and to the right. So if you moved slightly, you're changing that angle slightly, so it could be slightly different. It could be in the same location, depending on how they bounce and roll.
Okay. So if you fired the gun and and the casing ricocheted off the wall, but then you moved the gun and fired it again somewhere else, it could miss the ricocheting of the wall altogether, right?
Again, without knowing the scene, I couldn't say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in your report, I don't want to simplify it because I know that you are a scientist, but is it basically saying that this gun, that those casings came from this particular gun?
My exact wording would be very similar to that. It would say items, whatever the unique identifier is, were identified as having been fired from item, which is the gun.
Okay. This particular gun, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And then you would say that those projectiles also came from this particular gun. Is that correct? Okay. And then, and this testing was done this year on March 4th, is that correct?
March
Right.
4th is my report date, meaning all of the analysis is completed and it is done. At that point, my analysis was actually conducted on the 3rd.
Okay. Okay, no more questions, thank you.
Redirect.
which side did the casings eject from on this Springfield?
On this particular Springfield, the ejection port is angled to the right and up.
Okay. So in order well, let me ask you this. When casings are ejected and you're not attempting to move your arm or the gun, do they always land right in the exact same spot?
They do not.
Do they bounce and roll?
They do. Again, it's a very violent action. That slide is moving very quickly. A lot of times the cartridge case is spitting, so they could tumble through the air and again bounce off of anything such as the floor, walls, anything around.
So even as each time you pull the trigger, if you're trying your hardest to keep it as still as you can, does that mean the casings will land exactly right next to each other?
No, they won't.
Where the casings land, does that depend on multiple factors?
Absolutely.
So the type of flooring or ground would be one thing?
Any kind of intervening objects, type of flooring, if it lands on grass, it's probably going to stick or stop, or if it lands in carpet or tile, wood, all bounces differently.
If it bounces off a wall, that would impact where it might land?
Yes.
So having fired guns multiple times, semi-automatics, at your best in trying to keep them together, are they maybe grouped in a general area together?
Typically, when we're firing multiple rounds repeatedly, they tend to generally land in like kind of a pool area. It's not small, but it is a generalized area.
And in a situation where a gun may be slightly moved, that cantering of a gun, can that change the location of the casing itself?
Absolutely. I mean, it's designed, as it's designed, it will eject up and to the right. So, I mean, if you turn it this way, it's up, could change dramatically however you're angling it or turning it.
When you are talking about casings and where they land, even if you go and see them, are you able to look at them and say that was from shot number 1 or that was from shot number 2?
Oh, no, we just generalize an area of where a shooter might have been.
And again, that's just because they're landing at best in a pool area, even if you're trying to shoot as straight and uniform as you can.
That's correct.
I have no other questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? I see at least one coming down. All right, I have a question from a juror. Where would the casings go if the gun was held sideways?
Just for clarification, sideways either way.
Why don't you tell us for either way?
So if I was to cant it sideways and the butt was down, it could potentially go up and fall to the left side because of the way the gravity would be. However, if you turn it this way, it's angling it further down. And again, it depends on how it hits the ground, what it can bounce off of.
All right, any other juror questions? Not seeing any follow-up from the defense based on that question?
No.
State?
No, Your Honor.
All right, sir, you can step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. State can call its next witness.
Thank you.